Hello, folks. How are you? Hopefully, you can see me and hear me. Somebody give me a wave if you can see or hear me here. It is raining here. I see some of you talking about sticky snow. What is the topic? Someone says. It's not a phrase I made up, but it's the Pettysburg Address. And there is Annie.
It works.
Ta-da! I know. I feel like every time I get on here, I want to say it works. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. So now I know you guys can hear me. You can see me. Life is good. So wonderful. And yes, the Pettysburg Address is not my phrase, but I will explain everything. I will explain everything when we officially start. I want to give folks a little bit of time to get here. I'm assuming, is it pretty much cold and either rainy or snowy?
And windy. Some schools are closed for wind.
Oh.
Yeah, like they got an extra early day of winter break because the wind was so harsh that things were blowing around. They were worried buses would dip and whatnot in certain parts of the country. So that was a new one, wind delay or wind.
Wow. I guess we're gonna, with climate change, have all kinds of interesting new kinds.
Yeah, pretty much.
I almost picked up my mug without covering it up. That would have been horrible. I'm catching up to see who's here. Yeah, Betsy, you need coffee. I need coffee. I got my coffee.
I still haven't figured out how to connect the chat to StreamYard. I was hoping by coming in this way, it would let me. I'm worried that if I switch over to comments, I'm going to get kicked out.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. We'll have to practice.
I'm getting on my phone, which is very small print.
Oh, dear. Well, then
so
I
we'll
really
see how this goes. Yeah.
The shout-a-thon, indeed.
Maybe over winter break week, the two of us can do another practice session and see if we can figure out how to get the Q&A box and the chat to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be good. Soon to be warming up Minnesota, Dave. Wow, you're lucky.
Yeah.
Tim's daughter reports nearly 100-mile-an-hour winds in Colorado. Woo! Well, I haven't gone outside, but it doesn't look windy. Of course, it's kind of hard to tell. It's like I can't see any trees or anything
going around the window.
No. Nothing is floating around.
Yeah.
We'll wait a few more minutes for more folks to come.
I know I'm drinking tea instead of coffee because I have a little cold, so I'm hoping not to be sick over today.
Okay. Jim says raw. Yay. Okay. Oh, thank you, Carolee. Okay. We're going to remember that.
Okay.
Actually write it down because I always forget. Oh, and I forgot. Very important. I'll even do it in front of you, which is really humiliating. But I brought these and then I forgot to put them in. Not ready for prime time.
Yeah. So 296. I'm trying to remember that number in my head.
I wrote it down so that you can see it. This ear never cooperates. I'm going to have to take the other one out. I know. Okay. Not ready for prime time. I always have to look in a mirror for the other one.
Oh, that's funny.
I know. I don't know why. It's like, decade 5. I still can't find it. So anyway, a charming moment that I shared with you. Hello from Boise. Hello, Boise. Hang in just a little bit more. Give it another minute or two. Yay! Jessica is there. Thank you very much. Oh, and Bobby, thank you very much. That is kind. I'm so happy to be here. Just always am. Just have to say.
Yep. Are you going to the West Coast to see your family over the winter break?
I am, but I'm going actually after Christmas this year, partly because it's so much cheaper. And we're going to pretend that it's Christmas Eve when I get there. Because why not?
I feel like you're filming next year's Hallmark movies. I mean,
Well, we
that's how they do it.
I guess. I mean, we normally make guacamole and sit around and watch movies. And so that's just going to happen when I get there. And we'll say, hey, it's December 24th. So, yes.
Yeah.
I will be.
Well, yeah, it's a good thing you're not trying to fly anywhere today. LaGuardia, all the planes are grounded because of the wind.
Oh, I guess I
They
didn't.
were earlier this morning. What a mess. Can you imagine? Yeah.
Betsy says, I will defiantly wear just one earring if the other is having a bad day. That would mean I would only ever have one earring. I don't know what it is. I don't know why.
Your thing though, like I'm Joanne, the historian who only wears one earring.
It could.
Good.
I could pretend that I did that on purpose.
Yeah, a new trendsetter.
I don't understand some of what you're saying. But it is indeed true that I'd made a Rob Reiner commentary since there was such a response to it. And
I saw that.
I was, not ready for prime time there either. But I'm just sometimes folks going to beam in and be not ready for prime time.
We like it. We like it.
If I have something to say, I will be there. Maybe a lesson about pirates. I could get really creative with the one earring thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Emma, the tour guide. Wait a minute. What's your new name? Fiorentina, New Jersey. See, we got new handles.
Yeah, we got to figure out who everybody is again. Banjo Donna's not Banjo.
Oh, I know. Well, I like that, Kim. Actually, I used to do that too. 2 earrings in one ear and one in the right ear. We are having a very meaningful conversation.
That was like an early 2000 thing.
Was it?
I feel like it was like late 90s, early 2000. Everybody was getting
a 90s thing. Isn't it a 90s thing?
I don't know. I just remember my sister did it. My mom was freaking out. I was like, it's just another hole in her ear.
Someone just said that Tim Snyder, my colleague, former colleague, Tim Snyder is also streaming. See, this is the thing. There's always someone streaming.
So he's streaming like right this second?
I guess.
Oh.
I don't know. When I did the Rob Reiner commentary, Heather was streaming.
Oh.
Y'all
got to make a schedule like historians when you stream so you're not dissing each other out.
I know, like a calendar. It's impossible to keep track. And so I guess you pick one and go back and watch the other.
You've owned Fridays at 10 for a very long time.
Yes, that is true. That is true. Hey, Tim.
Come on now. Work with us here. Work with us.
Okay. I'm thinking maybe we should begin 4 minutes after. Okay. Hello, folks, and welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. The title of today's episode, I titled it The Pettysburg Address. That is not my phrase. And when I tried to be a good historian and find where it came from, I actually found it going all the way back, even before Wednesday's address. So I'm just putting it there in quotation marks to make it clear that I did not make it up. But before I discuss that, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted as always to be with everyone. We are still learning how this whole YouTube StreamYard environment works. So we really appreciate everybody showing up. It's great to have so many new faces, which is one of the reasons that YouTube is a great platform for us to move to. And we understand some of you who've been with us for a very long time are still like figuring this out. So are we. So I just want to remind you that we are still like trying to figure out how to get the Q&A to work. So it's helpful if you kind of keep your questions till towards the end. And then that way it'll be easier for me to find them. And if you'll put the capital letter Q 3 times, so Q, 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 in front of your question, that seems to be the easiest way right now for me to find them. So when Joanne's done speaking for about 30 minutes or so, I will be back. And that's when I will look for your questions in the chat.
Thank you, Annie. And as Annie suggested, we are still figuring this out. So stick with us here and we will figure out how to do the Q&A better and any number of other things. I should also say this is episode number 296. Shocking, but true. And those of you who are here for the first time or one of the first times, please tell folks. A lot of you probably are here for the first time. And if you tell folks, you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community, which has been coming here for 295 previous episodes. Okay, so I'm going to, here we go, do this so I don't get distracted by looking at your comments. If I look at your comments, I will want to talk to you. Okay, so obviously, given the title that I gave this episode, the Pettysburg Address, I want to talk a little bit about Wednesday night's address that President Trump gave. I want to talk a little bit about what it didn't do, and then a little bit about what such addresses normally do, to kind of put the whole thing in context. I think it's so easy these days when so many things are abnormal to have something bizarre go whizzing by you and you just sort of accept it as, well, that just happened, rather than considering or comparing it or contrasting it with what would be more normal in this circumstance. So that's in that spirit that I want to talk about President Trump's address and then presidential addresses generally. Those of you who saw it know it was actually 18 minutes, amazingly brief, spoken very quickly, and sort of yelled. I'm going to come back to that, but the delivery of it was interesting. But it was, for the most part, an 18-minute self-defense, claiming accomplishments and blaming Biden and Democrats. And that's pretty much what it was. And I'm not going to march through the, let's just say it, lies, exaggerations, and anything else that were there. If you go online and Google around, you will find lists of all of the things that he said that are basically really just not true or really exaggerated. So what we had, even apart from the fact that much of what he said was pretty blatantly not true, and that in and of itself goes back to what I just said, like that is abnormal by itself. There's a president addresses us, and a lot of people know, given the president's track record, much of what he says is not going to be true because that's what he does. So there's a president addressing the nation, and we can say, no, I'm not going to believe that because I know factually it's wrong. At any rate, he chose to defend and blame. He was speaking to the nation in a sense because of technology. He was on TV. He was speaking to us. He wasn't really engaging with the nation, right? He wasn't really talking to us or talking to specifically anyone. He was just sort of announcing and defending. I'm going to come back to that, but in and of itself, that's pretty interesting. So it felt defensive, and I see the word panicked floating around in the comments. It felt defensive and a little panicky or a little anxious. It felt like it was what you do when you know that your approval ratings are at 39%. You give an address. So yeah, it did not do many things that presidential addresses normally do. For example, did it announce the State of the Union? Did it talk about, in reality, other than it's the best it's ever been in 3,000 years, other than those kinds of claims, did it actually address the State of the Union in a calm, rational way? Not really, because the claims that he could have made, had he not exaggerated them to the point of the ridiculous, he didn't make by exaggerating them to the point of the ridiculous. So was it a traditional State of the Union address? No. Sometimes these kinds of addresses happen because of some just happened or just about to happen military activity. Because he was talking about Venezuela, I gather, on Truth Social, many people thought he was going to come on and somehow or other announce declaring war against Venezuela or military action against Venezuela, which who the heck knows what he will invent along those lines. But this did not do that. And that certainly is one conventional thing that these kinds of addresses do. Did he offer a sense of what the policies that he is promoting, specific policies that he's promoting for his second term? Did he say, here's what I want to do? Not really. He supposedly did it all already, according to that address. So again, not conventional. Did he discuss a specific vision for the nation? Not really. He just said, we're the best, we're the better than we've ever been. Somewhere in there. The Middle East is at peace for the first time in 3,000 years. That I knew there was a 3,000 figure in there. So for the most part, not real policies, not real specific vision, no military activity, not a traditional State of the Union address. The one thing that he did say, and this was the quirky part about it to me, he could have focused on one or two things that he could claim more readily than many of the things that he did. So, for example, he announced a $1,776 warrior dividend that he was going to give out, sending soldiers $1,776, quote, and the checks are already on the way. Nobody deserves it more than our military, quote unquote. And he said the money came from tariffs, which he said, my favorite word, or one of them, tariffs. And in fact, no, the payments are being funded by repurposed military housing assistance that was approved by Congress earlier. So no, tariffs didn't accomplish this. And I normally really quiet this down, and now it's gone. He could have said, I want to do this and give it to people and sort of stopped there. And that wouldn't have been an absolute lie, but no, he had to then say it's because of tariffs, my tariffs are wonderful. Look at what they've done. Okay. But he could have focused on that, right? Okay. So let me talk a little bit about where the idea of the State of the Union address comes from. The formal basis for a State of the Union address comes from the Constitution. It's actually in there. Here's what it says. The president, quote, shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the State of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. That's Article 2, Section 3, Clause 1. So in essence, it says give information to Congress and make recommendations. Now, over time, technology has changed the nature of that, obviously, because now, with radio and then with television, it became possible for presidents to really address the nation, which fundamentally changed what these addresses are. And they became kind of a forum to speak to the American people, which certainly was the vein in which President Trump intended it, defending himself, I guess, before everybody, but he assumed a big national audience. Now, generally speaking, when a president wants to give an address, someone from his staff apparently goes to the networks and says, the president wants to give an address, and here's the basic topic of it, and it's discussed, and more often than not, networks decide to air the address. Sometimes they haven't. I think both President Obama and President Biden at one point, several stations, if not all stations, decided not to air one of their addresses because it was supposedly too partisan. But at any rate, that has happened in the past. Most recently, a recent address from President Biden, at least one can say it was defensive, although not like this. So I'm trying to provide some context here. In March of 2024, President Biden kind of gave a fighting back speech. Some of it had to do with everybody saying he's too old, he shouldn't be doing this. Remember those days? So in a sense, he was fighting back against those claims. He was fighting back against my predecessor, who he called Trump throughout his address. So he was responding to like claims that he was not up to the job. Again, he didn't yell at us, but it was purpose driven and it was in defense, self-defense. So again, presidents don't always stand up and calmly announce the state of the nation. There are all kinds of reasons to have the address. But in this case, supposedly, the Trump administration didn't initially announce what the address was for to networks. Then it said kind of a state of the nation. So at any rate, that's how this started. But more often than not, it's a forum to address the nation, and that's the spirit in which these addresses are taken. Generally speaking, Trump, I have my notes here on what he said. I wonder, I'll be curious when we get to the Q&A, how many of you watched it. I will confess I did not watch it, and then I went back and listened to it later on my own time, on my own schedule. He, did not, I inherited a mess and I am fixing it, he said. So even though he claimed everything's better, prices are going down and gas prices are going radically down. I think he said $1.99 a gallon. Nowhere really, although one of the press outlets I looked at said, it's possible there might be a stray gas station or two where gas is $1.99 per gallon, but basically no. But he did suggest that Americans are actually living in a glorious new golden age made by this president. And again, I feel a need as a historian to say here, anytime anyone, not just Donald Trump, but anytime anyone says for the first time in American history, the most in American history, unique in American history, any of those sorts of statements, sometimes they might be true. More often than not, they're not. I tell my students that if you're going to claim unique first only, you darn well better be right. Because if you're out in the world and make a claim like that, someone is going to come right back and say, no, and then you've made yourself avoidably wrong. So but he does that all the time. And as my historian brain gets irritated because then I know it's beyond not true. He's just making it up. But at any rate, he addressed the nation. He was defensive. He didn't offer us really a vision. He didn't talk about what he wanted to do. According to him, he'd accomplished it all. So the nature, it's worth thinking about as you evaluate what we saw on Wednesday, really what he was trying to do. And I think as most people are saying here, and actually someone said it wasn't everyone saying Biden was too old. No, that's true. I exaggerated, but it was a lot of people in the press saying he was too old. So I don't want to go off that rail, but when you're talking, it's easy to exaggerate, as we saw. At any rate, think about the purpose of it and what he wanted to accomplish. And seemingly what he wanted to accomplish in the spirit of this presidency was about himself. He wanted people to think better about himself. And he threw around a lot of facts to make people seemingly feel better about him, to counter the fading approval rating that he has. Now, here's an interesting fact, not a soothing fact, but an interesting fact. I believe this is from an Associated Press story, and they spoke with a former NBC News executive, Mark Lukashevich. I'm going to say his name wrong, and I apologize. He is Dean of Hofstra University's Communications School. He led NBC's special broadcasts for more than a decade. So he was asked, why would networks, will they learn from this? Will they say, oh, maybe we don't always want to air really partisan addresses from the president? One of Biden's addresses after January 6th, in which he was going to talk about January 6th, it wasn't aired on all the channels because it was seen as highly partisan. So this former NBC executive was asked, well, you think people will learn from this and then actually realize how partisan the next address will be? Will they say no next time? Will they not air it? And this is what Mr. Lukasiewicz, forgive me, said, quote, "I don't know. Those overlaying factors of the incredible pressure that this president can bring and has shown himself completely willing to bring on these organizations, meaning media, news organizations, and their corporate parents when he's unhappy, that's still part of the equation." Okay, think about what he said here, this former NBC executive. He's asked, so this was blatantly partisan. Is it possible that some networks are going to say, no, we don't want to air this kind of address. It's not what we normally do. And this executive says, probably not likely. Why? Because he was willing to, rain down wrath and attack news organizations, their corporate parents, and whoever's deciding whether to air something or not needs to factor that in. That's so representative of this presidency and President Trump's first term. It's governing by bullying. It's people who are afraid to speak up and afraid to push back because they're afraid of the consequences. And if you just pause for a moment and think about the many different situations, the many different circumstances in which people have said that in one way or another, right? Well, or we hear that, right? We hear that, wow, there are many Republicans in Congress who are upset, but they don't say something in part because they're afraid of what will happen. If not from the president, then from the president's supporters who will feel encouraged by him. At this point, it happens so often, we might begin to feel that it's normal, but I want to step back here and sort of capture everything that I've said here, what I said at the beginning. If you watch that address, you could see he was yelling, you could see what he was doing, you could say, wow, that's what he was doing, typical him. But what you might not do, and I guess what I'm urging you to do here in my comments today, is to think about how out of the norm it was. How out of the norm it was, the manner, the nature, the message. To think about what was just said, the quote that I just gave, and I just saw it, I think, whiz by in comments, that I don't know if networks are going to refuse to air a partisan speech like that in the future because he might punish them. Think about the abnormality of that. So there's bullying all over the place, right? Partly in the nature of the address, but equally, if not more important than that, the fact that networks seemingly would be nervous about not airing something he wants to say. That's where we are, and the degree of abnormality that's considered regular, that's considered to be something that probably will affect future addresses. That's where we are, right? That's where we are. So don't lose sight of the abnormality, the strangeness, the irresponsibility, or the dangers inherent in some of what we see. Even if it's something we see a lot, it's still abnormal. It's abnormal in the course of American history. It's abnormal in the course of recent history. It's not normal for a functioning democratic nation. And we need to own that. We can't normalize that. And if we begin to accept it as, oh, that's what he does, that's a form of normalizing it. We need to call it out. We need to call it out. Okay, I'm just about done. I'm going to stop there. For those of you who are here for the first time, for 295 previous weeks, I had a mug that had something to do with the topic at hand. And I don't have 295 mugs, but thank you. And thank you, Cara Lee. I normally get a chant, mug, 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 which then reminds me, but I remember today, this is not going to be shocking in any way. And I have used it before. And it was a gift, I believe, from when I did a live episode at the National Council for History Education conference. It's the presidential mug. It has actually a lot of slogans and mottos. Oh, no third term, Democrats for Wilkie. Clinton, a cure for the blues. There are a lot of things on here that we might not absolutely remember. Back to normalcy. Who is James K. Polk? That would be a good slogan for his opponent. Anyway, that is the mug. That is the mug for today. On topic, not surprising. But
Dave says you could have also used your Mr. Grumpy mug.
Oh, that's in New Haven, though. But you're right. That would have been even better. That would have been even better.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right. So I'm just reminding people, if you put the capital letter QQQ in front of your questions, I will do my best to look for them. I don't see any yet, but that doesn't mean that they're not about to come, and then they'll come so fast we will have trouble keeping up with them. So we will do our best. So go ahead and start adding your questions now. The chat has been, as always, very active while you were speaking.
I saw just, zipping by there.
Yeah, they said you need 2 grumpy mugs, one in New Haven.
I guess I need another grumpy mug.
That's funny.
That is totally true.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Okay. The first question says, would you please comment on the normalcy of the Walk of Fame that was installed in the colonnade this week at the White House?
Okay. Yes.
They're coming out hot.
Pardon?
They're coming out hot today.
Now, boom. Yes. Well, okay. Normalcy. Abnormal. I should just have like a scarlet A. Abnormal. It's abnormal. Without the captions, it was strange, but actually, and offensive, because some of the pictures of former presidents were actually attacks. So again, it was about what the president thinks of people. It wasn't about the people. But then adding on the captions, which are they read sort of like Truth Social rants. You almost want them all to be in capital letters, so it'll be in character for him. That shows you so many things, but one of them is the degree to which he doesn't consider the White House ours. He considers it his. And it's his, obviously, to do with what he wants. And what he wants to do, kind of in line with the address on Wednesday, is attack people, attack predecessors, attack people who he thinks are better loved than him, attack people who seemingly did good things and people praise them for it. Just, again, the idea, first of all, of the Walk of Fame, and the presidents who he attacked. I won't even go into the detail, but with pictures or images. But to me, beyond the pale is those captions. Like, the White House isn't Truth Social. He really thinks that not only the White House is his, but that the presidency is his. And this is a very obvious thing to say, but it's a very true thing to say. And that, I don't want to say more than anything else, but certainly as much as anything else, is a prime indicator of that. That it's his house, and he can say or do whatever he wants, knocking down the East Wing, for example. And this is more of the same. And, I'm sure he is not thinking this way, but thinking as a historian. Whenever in the future people look back to talk about this administration, he has just offered the most bizarre, blatant statement about who he is, what he stood for, and what he did. If I were a historian, I would start a chapter with that. That would be, evidence of a kind that most presidents wouldn't really offer, that kind of blatant, in-your-face attack dog, proud blast in the White House on its walls. So, obviously I have strong feelings about that. It's the scarlet A. We get abnormal for that, but it reveals a heck of a lot.
All right. The next question is, what should be keeping the U.S. functioning as it was intended? And why is that not working? Or is it? Where are the breaking points?
Oh, so many breaking points. Well, I mean, we've been seeing things not working that should be working, and these won't be surprises, right? So Congress. The fact that Congress is an independent, separate branch that's supposed to be a check on the executive, and that is its job. And it's very clearly stated in our very brief Constitution. When I teach the Constitution, I always highlight the fact that it sets out the basic structure of a government. That is its purpose. And it was assumed that in action, that the character of the government, the details of the government would be worked out once it was in motion. But even that skeletal Constitution that we have makes it really clear: checks and balances, 3 branches of government. Those checks are not working the way that they're supposed to work right now, to an extreme degree. And, is there an easy solution to that? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there is one. I do think, and I've said this before, and I will keep saying it, it isn't the solution, but it's certainly something to bear in mind, is that we get the leaders, the politicians who we give power to, who we put in office. And I'm not saying wait till the next election, we'll show them. But I am saying when you are electing or choosing leaders locally or nationally, remember that you're going to get what you ask for. And I think I've talked about this before, the second half of the 1850s, when Northerners began to elect people to Congress who were going to fight back. They were tired of being crushed by Southerners. They elected a new kind of congressman who got to Congress and announced, I'm not the old kind, I'm a new kind. That was a very obvious case in which people said, you know what? We've had enough. This is what we want. So it's not an easy fix. We can't wait until an election to fix everything, but it's something important to bear in mind.
So Ellen was asking, I think, given your mug, what were some of the most memorable, she said your top 3 presidential addresses. Are there some that really stand out to you as a historian that are important?
Well, I'm gonna obviously go way back in time, because those are the ones that I've taught the most often. I will say that Thomas Jefferson's this is his inaugural address, not a State of the Union address, but a presidential address, stands out because it was after a period of intense partisanship, and he stood up and announced, we are all Federalists, we are all Republicans, meaning now we can put that partisanship aside. What's interesting about that, first of all, is the degree to which it shows you that kind of two-party clashing was not considered normal at the time. And certainly it was not put aside at that moment. But interestingly to me, and again, it tells you what a different time that was, when Jefferson took office, I went and read the letters of Federalists who clearly were really not thrilled that he was president and actually had tried to intervene and prevent him from being elected president. Imagine that. And a number of them to each other said basically, okay, let's step back here for a moment and see what happens. Maybe it won't be as bad as we think it will be. That little pause, there are a number of those little pauses or maybe they're not as evil as we've been saying they are, moments that represent such a different character, such a different spirit, such a willingness to actually think about the fact that government is made of people, and that in addition to parties, and that you can sort of adapt and see what's going to happen and give people a little bit of grace to prove that who they are and what they are and whether they're good or bad. We're not in that era anymore. We haven't been in that era for a while, but every once in a while I like to look back. And at this moment when party politics, organized party politics were seen as bad, abnormal, right? Shouldn't be there. And they were still trying to figure out the degree to which debate and compromise was fundamentally possible without attack, bang. That was one of the early things being determined in the founding era. was really the spirit of our politics. So that address, there are any number of them, or State of the Union addresses. That one stands out because it so highlights a key difference in the spirit of that moment from ours.
All right. The questions are coming in now, fast and furious. Someone was asking if the FCC is independent. That goes to your earlier comment about would they pull him off the air? They're wondering, is that an independent, or could he literally say, well, if you don't air my rant, then I'm going to pull your license?
You know, I've spoken about the FCC in the past, years ago, and I remember talking about changes within the FCC, but I'm not going to make them up as I sit here. So I cannot remember. Someone is going to be able to look it up and tell me. It's not in my brain. I talked about it when talking about debates. Actually, when I was talking about presidential debates and airing debates and how they should be aired or not be aired, I talked about, so it's going to be, in our archive, but at the moment I can't recall how the FCC was changed and when the FCC was changed.
Okay.
It's like, Tim, you're up.
Tim, I'm sure Tim is looking right now.
Yes.
All right. I'm looking for the cues. Some people were putting red question marks, but guys, let's stick to the cues because I'm looking for the cues. Paul is asking, before the radio and TV era, did presidents have any equivalent way of trying to get the attention of the entire nation?
Well, before radio and TV, there was the telegraph, although presidents didn't generally say, I'm going to use the telegraph to address the nation. They put things in writing, and newspapers printed and reprinted and reprinted and reprinted them. So think, for example, of George Washington's farewell address, right? That was published and republished and republished, and it was intended to be in newspapers around the country. And in the founding era, newspaper editors were allowed to send each other news free, no postage fee charged, so that networks of news could be built up, and so that along the lines of this question, so that the nation could actually be informed of things, and people in one part of the union could grab news from another part of the union without necessarily having to pay for it. So Washington's farewell address is an example of that. Now, in that case, it was George Washington. It's the first time a president has stepped down. People really, were looking to see what he said. Newspapers were used at other moments. Actually, speeches, I studied this a little bit in the context of my last book. The United States was really in an age of oratory in at least the first half of the 19th century and into the second half of the 19th century. And what that meant was oratory mattered, right? Massive crowds would go to listen to speeches that were very long. And they would, grade these speeches. They would be printed in newspapers. What actually, this is a telegraph anecdote. What made that more complicated was the telegraph. I remember an instance in which I can't remember if he was running for president or was president, but he stood up in front of a crowd and began to bloviate about what he thought, and then noticed that there was a reporter in the audience who was probably going to go to the Telegraph, that there was going to be a Telegraph report of what he was doing. And he stopped. And he was like, oh, no. What I'm saying is not intended for the nation at large. It's intended for this audience. After a certain point, and the Telegraph helped make that a reality, you could no longer speak to a certain audience or one part of the union and not another part of the union, even without modern technologies. Franklin Pierce's presidential campaign, he ran as anti-slavery in the North and pro-slavery in the South.
It didn't go viral.
It did not go viral. So the fact that technology, on the one hand, allows politicians to address the nation, it can also hold them responsible for things. Although we have so many things that are, recorded and in front of us, and they're still denied. But technology can actually sometimes help with the enforcement of actual democracy.
Okay, the next question is, were the founders as macho warrior as the current president and his administration, or were they more pro-gentleman?
Okay. But macho warrior, Andrew Jackson is the first macho warrior president. That said, the first presidents, and this was an issue with John Adams, it was an issue with Thomas Jefferson, actually it was an issue for several presidents. Washington was a warrior. Washington was commander-in-chief of the army and became president. And in world history, it was assumed that, generals of armies become leaders. And so there was that kind of link. It was part of the assumption about his leadership. And John Adams certainly was not a military figure. Thomas Jefferson was not a military figure. And Jefferson particularly was really, during campaigning moments, scorned for not having any military experience, for being a coward and someone who's not fit to rule because he'd never had that kind of power before. John Adams, and I just love this anecdote, when he was president, he gave an address to Congress. And he showed up. I'm sorry, John Adams. I kind of like John Adams. He showed up wearing a sword. I'm the commander-in-chief of the army. I'm going to talk to Congress. John Adams was never a military figure, but he showed up as commander-in-chief wearing that sword. And that was recorded by people. Oh, look. So certainly people generally wanted the presidents to have some battle experience just for the meaning of it, the implication of it. But Jackson is the first one who sort of ran on that. That was part of, his campaign slogan, that when he ran for president against John Quincy Adams, the campaign message, one of them in part, was vote for the man who can fight, not the man who can write. That's a paraphrase, but that's basically what they were saying. So no, the short answer is that they weren't macho in the sense that we have now. Dueling was a way in which political leaders did prove that they were men of character, men who wouldn't lie. But dueling is, macho in a very different sense. You stand on it, you follow these rites and rituals, you stand on a field, you fire at each other and then ask, is honor satisfied? They would have said that was macho. By our standards, it doesn't sort of match up to what we see these days.
And Jacqueline wants to know, were there other past presidents who put their own names on buildings or rename things after themselves?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Did any other past presidents rename buildings or landmarks after themselves?
Well, I'm going to be a historian and not say no one ever has. I will say, so like the Kennedy Center. So the board of the Kennedy Center needs to approve that. And supposedly they unanimously did, except that one member of the board, and there are generally Trump supporters and cronies now on the board. There was one woman, and as I understand it, a Black woman, who was not going to support this. And she says she was muted. Mm-hmm. She was not allowed to speak up. So there is a process when it's allowed to happen. Have politicians explicitly named buildings after themselves when they were in office? That's definitely not the norm, folks. It just isn't. Afterwards, sometimes that happens, but it isn't. Normally, presidents don't declare their fame on walls and tear down buildings and stamp their names on buildings or put enormous sort of muralistic photographs of themselves hanging from buildings. That's dictator land. That's someone who's saying, I am important. My name is important. I am the government. And so my name will go everywhere and my image will go everywhere because that's what you should be thinking of when you think about our government. And that is not democracy. The president is a public servant. The president is there because of us. The president is not a king. Obvious, but must be said. He's not a king, shouldn't be a dictator. Many of the things that this president conceives of as normal and desirable are not. They're in the shadow of dictatorial behavior. If a president is saying it's all about me, and nothing else and no one else, that is not a president by our standards.
All right. Tim, our good friend Tim, says, in the Devane lecture, you spoke about foreign influence in national politics. Are we seeing that now with Venezuela?
Oh, there are all kinds of ways where there's foreign influence in national politics. Yeah, so I talked about it in my lecture course because Americans were terrified of foreign influence in national politics because the nation was new and it didn't really have a standing army, and foreign nations seemingly could easily sweep in France, England, and shift things around and change, particularly around presidential elections, get candidates elected who they wanted to. Washington's farewell address, he talks about foreign influence and the danger of foreign influence. Venezuela is a different kind of foreign influence. Venezuela is a president looking for a reason to make trouble, right? It's not as though there's at hand a horrible clash with Venezuela. What's happening on the ocean with supposedly drug runners heading to the United States, we still have seen nothing about who those people are and no details about what has happened there, and have even received information that some of those boats weren't even headed for the United States. There are people talking about, Venezuelan oil is being talked about a lot by this administration. Maybe that's the goal. There are people saying, maybe it's just like, look over here, shiny object, so that you don't look over here and see things that they don't want you to notice. Whatever's going on with Venezuela right now is being concocted. So that's foreign influence in a domestically deliberate way, which is just a different kind of foreign influence. But it's true, as that question suggests. It counts as that.
And Jean is asking, was there some sort of a benefit to a broader audience seeing that whole rant this week instead of a cherry-picked moments like on, social media?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're a Trump fan and you like what he represents, and those people are out there, 39%, they would have seen that and seen him being like, the fighter, the guy who they elected, who they wanted in office. But I think it's a handy thing. And it's part of why presidential addresses can be useful, particularly when they go a little off the rails. They really show what the president is about. And he stood up there and ranted defensively. It shows you the spirit that he is in at this moment. And all of the misleading and totally untrue claims that he made, that's handy to see him making them. He in that sense, he stood up and represented precisely what he is. And it's not that people don't know that already, but to see it that way in that formal a setting to the nation, rather than having him say something at a rally or something at a press conference, that is useful. If he wanted to stand up and show what he's about, he did. In all of its glory. And that's a useful thing, because I think in that formal setting, it would have even more of an impact on people than something thrown out at a press conference.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is, did the founders study productive types of debate styles, or were they coached to be a show-off type of a debater?
Oh, interesting. So the founders, certainly they were trained, elite founder folk were trained in rhetoric and debate. And in the late 18th century, it was not everyone did this, but there was like a form for it, right? There was a posture you were supposed to have that you would practice, and sort of, there was a ritualistic nature to oratory in that period. Those of you, I'm guessing most of you, have not read Tristram Shandy. It's a strange book, Lawrence Stern, written at the time, which I love because it captures weird 18th century humor. But one of the things it has in it is a passage describing someone giving a speech. And the description of it is like, he stood with his feet precisely X inches apart. He then raised his right hand partly and took his left hand and moved it out, then raised his right. And it's totally making fun of the fact that if you're giving a speech, you're going through the gestures so that you look like a classical orator. So certainly there were things you were supposed to do and things you were supposed to say. And often they were in a classical, ancient tradition of what oratory was supposed to be like. I remember, this is totally not irrelevant, but not important. I'm going to offer it to you anyway. There's a Hamilton letter when his son was born. He was writing to a friend talking about his new son. So this actually would have been Philip. And he says something in the letter jokingly, like, well, he has a way of raising his right arm, which suggests he will be a great orator in the future. So they were trained. But there were things you're supposed to do and things you were not supposed to do. The 19th century sees that get mixed up some. There's a great book by Kenneth Camille titled Democratic Eloquence, which is about, and democratic not meaning the party, democratic meaning in a democracy, talks about how styles of oratory changed over time, how little by little, no Latin shall appear in addresses, Abraham Lincoln being just a game changer. Really interesting book, and it talks about this sort of an issue.
All right. So I don't know who the person is. I can't pronounce their handle on YouTube, so I'm not even going to try, but they want to know, we're not going to talk about SCOTUS ? 6 individuals are giving permission for this to go on. I don't remember voting for them. Anyone else? So the question is, what are we going to do? Because these checks and balances aren't just failing in Congress. They're also failing at the judiciary level.
Yes. Yes. So when I talked before about checks and balances, I spoke specifically about Congress. I did not mean to only speak about Congress. There are things that are supposed to structure and prop up our government and how it runs, and checks and balances and independent branches are one of them. And when you have a president who doesn't care about checks and balances and two branches who seemingly don't either, it's a problem. Now, people have come up with all sorts of suggestions about what to do with the Supreme Court. Maybe we need to, add more justices. And it's true, we don't vote for justices. Presidents generally pick them, and then they're through a process or put in through Congress. It's another failure, the failure of checks and balances. And this is not going to be a surprise, but I'll mention it anyway. The failure of the simple presence of the rule of law. Right? The rule of law is part of what makes us a democratic nation. The idea that no one is above the law. The idea that if you break the law, there will be consequences. Now, there have always been, it always favors rich people. It favors white people. There are any ways in which our laws are biased in one way or another. But the idea that there's no legal accountability, particularly for people with a lot of power, which is kind of where we are. I don't know how many years ago I said we live in an era where there's a crisis of accountability. We sure as heck do. Because accountability means many things, but one of the things it means is if you break the law, you're held responsible. Now, if the Supreme Court says that a president essentially is above the law, not only is that a danger as far as the president is concerned, but it sort of informally empowers all the people around that president, suggesting, well, how important is the law anyway? That gets you down to the question of enforcement of the law, which is a different matter entirely. And again, all of the ways in which you see how norms of various kinds are being violated over and over again in all kinds of creative ways. The idea, the norm that you break the law and you will be held accountable, and now the norm that you just won't be, a nation without the rule of law is a nation that increasingly can act at the whim of a king or dictator. However, the law is our tool, right? It's not functioning correctly, but we can point to laws and say our rights are being violated. And we are still in a moment when courts are still functioning, you can still, we're not in a moment where we are powerless. And all the time, you should note when you're looking and reviewing the news, all the time, you see people, suing someone or another, or bringing suit against a part of the government or a person in power. And the fact that that's still happening, and some of them are in process, that matters. It matters. If we were further along on the dictator path, that wouldn't be happening. So it's important to note that, and to note not only all the ways in which we're slipping, but to notice the ways in which people are pushing back. Because those could be easy to overlook. They might not be as flamingly obvious, and certainly they're not outrageous. That's important to notice as well, because every one of those things is an encouragement to realize that we're in a fight. We're not in a fight that's over. We are in a fight that's ongoing, and we still don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. Our good friend Dave asked if Marbury versus Madison is constitutional. Seems like a huge problem to him. He wanted your thoughts on that. And Cindy asks, are we flat out losing our democracy? She said, it seems like a huge problem. They'd welcome your thoughts.
Okay. Marbury versus Madison really helps establish judicial review, right? And that, again, if you go back, initially it was assumed that the Supreme Court is going to be the weakest branch, because what does it have? It people bring cases to it, and it talks about the cases, and it doesn't have a lot of power. And it was hard to find people who wanted to be Supreme Court justice in the early years, because it was entirely unclear really what the Supreme Court was going to do. Marbury versus Madison suggests that now the Supreme Court can review things, legislation, that the Supreme Court now can judicially review things and declare them unconstitutional. Is that unconstitutional? Oh, Carolee says she loves teaching Marbury versus Madison. Is it unconstitutional? Well, it doesn't inherently violate the Constitution, right? It doesn't violate the Constitution. It is precedent. And so much about our government and about the courts, and particularly the Supreme Court, is precedent. And precedent matters, just like norms matter, right? It matters that it's there. And if you're going to break precedent or violate norms, you're going to be held to account for it in some way. You're not going to just sort of do it with no one paying attention. So is it unconstitutional? I would say no. It represents the fleshing out of precisely what the Supreme Court is going to do. And the next question was what?
We're just flat out losing our democracy.
Oh.
The person, I can't remember, it went too fast, who asked that question, but they said that they're really worried, and they wanted to know, is it also keeping you up at night? Are we just losing democracy?
Is our democracy seriously threatened and slipping? Yes. Does it keep me up at night? Yes. Do I think that this is over? No. So yes, I think, and have been saying this for years, that our democracy is under attack. It's being sort of pulled apart piece by piece, institution by institution. We're watching that happen. We're watching that happen with the way in which this particular president is using and abusing his office. There are things slipping away that we might not notice that they're slipping away, and then suddenly they're gone. So is our democracy threatened? Yes. Is it totally gone? Not yet. Not yet. But I think I've spoken many times about how American exceptionalism, meaning the idea that this sort of thing can't happen in the United States. It happens to other countries, but we're the United States. We're going to always be okay, basically. And, our democracy will be okay, basically. That's really sort of grounded into us. Certainly it was to me growing up in the United States. I assume that, the United States is different from everywhere else, and bad things of that sort will never happen here. And if you believe that without questioning it, without evaluating it, you're not going to see the nature of the threats that are right in front of you. American exceptionalism, the idea of American exceptionalism, can blind people to the absolute threat that we face right now. So is democracy being destroyed piece by piece? Yeah. Is it gone? No. But one of the reasons why I'm on here all the time, and why I talk up with Heather all the time, and why I've been doing this for years and years and years and years, is that fact. Because democracy is under attack. We're losing pieces of it all the time. I have been talking about this since Donald Trump's first term, and I will never stop talking about it, because we need to focus on it. We need to see it as it's happening, and we need to know that everything isn't over. You know, there are so many people, it seems to me, who are like, oh, well, you know, I guess this is it. No. And I wouldn't be here, you know, preaching if I didn't think that talking to you and pointing things out and offering historical context wouldn't in some ways encourage people to recognize what's happening, to understand that we can still push back, and to know that we have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. My YouTube is going crazy here.
And well, we're
juggling two devices. That's why I keep looking up and down, because my arm got tired of holding the phone out.
Okay. And we're 2 minutes past, so we're close.
Yep. Okay. So I don't see any more questions. I'm sure there were some that I missed, but I think I did better this week. By having everybody wait till the end, that really helps. So thank you, those of you who followed directions. I do want to say Carol Lee has noted several times, and for those of you who are new, Carol Lee and I are teachers, and there are many teachers because we started this show over at National Council for History Ed. Jessica Ellison is in the chat today. So a lot of the teachers who tune in regularly have been commenting about how difficult it's been to be a civics or a history teacher during this time, right? Especially this year has been really tough, because you're telling kids that we have these three branches and we have checks and balances, and then the adults are not exemplifying that. So we've had a lot of comments this morning, Joanne, about that, just anecdotally. But I
actually want to address something that I see that Carol Lee said just a moment or two ago. Every teacher is a civics teacher, whether they realize it or not. Before we go to the after party, which I will explain in a moment, I wanted to say this here because, excuse me, one of the students that was taking my America at 250 mega course said this to me yesterday when she was interviewing me about something. And she said in passing, you know, in my discussion section, right? So big lecture courses have discussion sections of about 15 to 18 students. She said, in my discussion section, we were asked what we're going to take away from this class. And she said, almost everyone, with one or two exceptions, said that we have to work hard for this nation. Right. That this nation, that's what we should do. Is I know. So yes, right. I didn't cry in front of my student, but I kept saying to her, that might be the nicest thing I will ever hear about this course, and maybe about, so, you know, think about that. We weren't preaching about current politics. We never talked about current politics, but we did talk about all of the challenges and struggling and fighting and people who were pushing for something, pushing hard against something. We were talking about real American history in all of its complexity, and the students, and it was broad, so it wasn't like a typical history course. It was big themes. And at least what a lot of students took away from that was, we have to work for this nation. We have to work hard for this nation. They came away with a civic understanding of what they should do and what they should be. And that was a normal history course. So I agree with what you said, Carol Lee. Every teacher can be a civics teacher, whether they realize it or not. Okay.
End.
Yes. Let me talk a little bit about what's going to happen next. So in a moment, we are going to go to the after party. And what that means is that we will no longer be recording, so that we can be even freer and easier than we normally are. I'm going to address Tom's question in a moment. normally, well, we are still figuring out after party-ness. For today, if you want to go into the after party and chat about whatever comes up, you need to go to another place. You need to go back to the National Council for History Education. You need to go to, and here's the URL, ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And if you go there, you will, poof, be in the after party. Someone just asked, and I've now already missed it. Next week, it's the 26th. Is it going to be real or pre-recorded? I'm going to try to do a real episode. So unless some weird thing happens, I will be here on the 26th, and who knows what we'll be talking about at that point. Let me say, as ever, thank you to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie. Thank you to NCHE. Thank you to Jessica and John and Claire. Thank you to you guys who come here week after week and engage in the conversation of democracy, because that is what we do. What we do here matters. It's what brings us back here week after week. So thank you for that. Actually, could that link be written down? Maybe I'll mention it one more time, and maybe we could.
I think Jessica put it in the chat. I'm pretty sure, and she told them to scroll down. I'm going to try and put it in again.
ncheteach.org/conversations. Okay. So everyone, there you go. Annie.
There we go. Okay. Yep. Jessica put it in.
Okay. So let us all hop over to the after party. I will be there shortly, and see you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
For those of you who can't come along, thank you for being here.
And have a good holiday season.
Yes.
Are we doing next week? I wasn't sure.
Well, I just said I'm going to do.
Sorry. Okay. I was trying to keep up with the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.